Are entrepreneurs discovered or developed? We'll talk about that today on Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I am the co-founder and publisher of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. Is an entrepreneur destined to be an entrepreneur and someone just finds them? Or can anyone with a reasonably good idea be given the skills, tools, development to become the entrepreneur they want to be? We're going to talk a little bit about that and what underpins it with Andrew Goldner. He's the founder and CEO of GrowthX, which supports B2B companies in their revenue development. Andrew, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Chris.
Andrew, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you. All right.
We're grateful.
So let's start with the geography that underpins this. There is lots of good, well-regarded research that knows some magic happens when you take a founder and you put them in a high-performing region. And then a lot of us have done work around how much of that magic can be brought elsewhere. You're sitting in Nashville. We technically do reporting in lots of other markets. Talk to me a little bit about your view on the geography side of this. Are you discovering entrepreneurs around the country who would have thrived in the right circumstances no matter what? Or do you think more that you are finding people and developing them? How do you think of this question of discovered versus developed entrepreneurship?
I think the answer is both.
I'm
And
gonna have to push you on that because it's such a cheap. But I'm gonna let you ride.
But I'm gonna get into it. I do think the answer is both. I think there's a bias in the coast towards discovery, and I have a bias towards developed. I also think that because of the work that's been done, the good work in rising cities across America over the last decade, it's easier to discover than it used to be. And so now we also have not only more of an impetus, but more of an opportunity to develop.
Say more about that. Like, what's the impetus change?
It's AI, frankly, it's changed everything. And of course, therefore, it has also changed, what it means to be a startup. I think, it's an interesting question you've asked. I think maybe the more interesting question, frankly, in the age of AI is what do you mean by developed? Because I think discovery is pretty
Okay.
straightforward, right? Ambition, urgency, resilience, curiosity, a bias towards action, the things that we think of when we think of the heuristics of a founder, of an entrepreneur. But what do we mean by developed? And I think that's where we're entering a new phase, and rising city ecosystems need to pay attention to this because I don't think that the playbooks have caught up yet. If you look at, let's say, the last decade or so, the cities that we're referring to, the Nashvilles, the Buffalos, the Birminghams, the Clevelands, right? They've been trying to answer the same question. How do we develop more startups here? And I think that was the right question for a while. And it also led to a lot of useful things like accelerators and seed and now pre-seed funds and university programs and meetups and all that kind of stuff. And essentially, it's now more people willing to identify as an entrepreneur in places that didn't often happen, and more of an opportunity to kind of publicly declare and ask for help. But I think the question of development has changed because it's no longer enough for these rising city ecosystems to just simply develop more startups. In the age of AI, everyone is a builder, right? So the better question is, how do more regions help more of its startups become real companies? And just to be clear, I don't mean by real, I don't mean venture backed necessarily. And I certainly don't mean accepted into an accelerator and invited onto a pitch deck stage. I mean something much more basic than that, which is our customers buying enough of what the company sells to eventually create enough economic value in the city in which they were built to support jobs, wages, and local wealth rather. I think that's really what I mean by development.
Man, there's a lot in there. So let's pick. You said a few things I want to touch on. Let's do the accelerator thing. This gets talked about in lots of economic development, ecosystem building circles. We saw really excellent, important accelerator programs develop around the country. And there was a time, especially in the early 2010s, when this felt like the right way for this to feel real, especially when we were first tying entrepreneurship to modern economic development. It made sense to economic developers. Hey, there's going to be a building, and we're going to put people in a building, and they're going to get some employees in that building, and they'll buy from the food trucks outside, but they'll also be with each other, and so it backs into adjacency theory, and then the idea of like you're bumping into each other in serendipity. And it felt good, and it all kind of made sense, and a lot of them were relatively generic, like SaaS or software or tech accelerators. Come one, come all. If you just wanted to like read the right books and build pitch decks together, we'll do it. And I probably would defend that maybe some of that work was actually less about the company building than the community building, which I argue did matter. But some of the company outcomes probably underwhelmed because it really wasn't first and foremost a company building exercise. It was something else. But we've advanced a lot now over the last 15, 20 years. And I think we're having another conversation around what does an accelerator do for a place. We at Technically have reported a ton around those that have survived have gone a lot more narrower, suddenly going very narrow in some sort of field where there is an experienced mentor who's placed in an area, and there's some existing corporate infrastructure, and there is some talent workforce. And then you start saying, well, there's a real blend between discovered and developed there. Just give me your narrative of where we are in the accelerator moment, and should cities, regions, states be divesting of accelerators? Do they play a different role? Talk to me a bit about your stance on that matter.
And I agree with everything you said. And I mean, the reality is, counting how many founders participated is easy. Counting how many founders changed the focus of their outreach after like market evidence showed them to do it is harder, right? Like
Yep.
counting how many pilots were announced or how much capital was raised is easy. Counting whether revenue quality improved over time is harder. And so, listen, I agree with you 100%. The first playbook made sense. And I think, as always is the case, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, it's easy, and I have to stop myself from doing this because it's easy now to question the old startup ecosystem playbook. The pitch nights, co-working spaces, demo days, ecosystem maps, right? But
Right.
that would be too cynical. I mean, even my air quotes, that's cynical, right? A lot of that work was a rational response to what regional leaders were seeing. I mean, Silicon Valley had something that rising city ecosystem did not: density.
Yep.
Founders were near
Yep.
other founders, operators who had done it before, and capital was nearby. You had, early employees that had seen what a startup looked like from the inside, and all the things around it, the lawyers, the recruiters, the angels, the product people. Like all of that was moving through a relatively small network. But if you were a city outside of that orbit, if you were in Rochester or Tulsa or Cleveland or Detroit, the gap was pretty obvious. Founders were isolated. There was obviously fewer experienced mentors, and capital was very scarce. And by the way, the local business community didn't really know what to do with a startup. And so what happened is your entrepreneurs left. And so naturally, cities tried to recreate some of what Silicon Valley had. They tried to recreate the Silicon Valley conditions, and an industry was built around that, become the Silicon Valley of blank, right? And so, and it helped. More congregation of founders. They funded accelerators, right? They created startup weeks, right? They built innovation districts. And so I don't think that logic was wrong. I mean, density, proximity, and trust all matter, right? Steve Case, obviously, more than maybe anybody else, helped popularize what we're talking about. The problem is, for a while, that beginning was enough progress. It's just not enough anymore. right? It's not enough for it to just be more visible or for entrepreneurship to be normalized. And I think Kauffman Foundation also does an incredible job of pulling together the statistics of what it matters and what it means. But and this is, I think, to your question, right? Startup activity and startup growth are not the same thing. And so I think the distinction is where a lot of ecosystems are getting stuck now. They have plenty of startup activity and they're still funding it, right? But they still don't have enough startup growth. And so what we see now are rising cities that have accelerators and mentors and demo days and newsletters full of good news, but they're still producing too few companies that reach repeatable revenue. It's like to me, it's like they're waking up from a hangover and they're looking back over the last 10 years and they're looking at the balance sheet and saying, look how much we've spent on it and comparing it to the ROI on that investment. And they're still sitting there and they don't actually have what they need, which is the companies producing repeatable revenue so they can create jobs, fuel economic growth, and stay rooted in their communities. And I think, to me and to us at GrowthX, AI is the thing that changed the bottleneck, right? If you look at the pre-AI ecosystem playbook, it was built for a world where the hardest thing was getting started in building, right?
Mm,
I mean, you remember it, you and I, right? Can you find technical talent?
hmm
Could you afford it? How do I get a prototype into the world before I run out of money? Do I look credible enough to even attract help and outside capital? I mean, AI hasn't just made those questions easier to answer. I mean, frankly, it's made some of those feel like just the wrong questions to even be asking. And I think, and then I'll stop and pause and give you a chance to reflect. I think that anybody who's reading the news now around AI, you can absolutely argue how much of the productivity around AI holds up because a lot of it is messy, and that's fair. Some of the AI hype is silly, and some of the demos are misleading, and frankly, some of the code is bad and dangerous. But I think, you know, the directional point is, I think, pretty hard to dispute. And maybe the next time we get together, we'll have a debate, not just a conversation. But I think it's absolutely easier than it ever has been to be a small team and create the appearance and often the reality of a functioning product, right? You can
hmm
get a product, you can get a prototype, you can get a landing page, you can write code, you can draft customer emails, you can research markets, you can generate lists. All these things you can do, at scale, nearly instantaneously and almost for no charge. Um, but you know, if anyone can get something built, the harder question is no longer whether a product can exist. It's whether anyone needs it badly enough and are they willing to pay for it, right? And so I think that, the new failure mode looks like progress.
The new failure mode looks like progress. Uh, so I like that. the The origins of this question, where I first interact with it maybe a decade ago, was stumbling around some good interesting research that I'll make sure to cite in the follow up piece, and I'll try to remember to put it in the show notes. But um, there was like interesting kind of analysis around um, the venture studio, venture capital stuff. That's where some of the research was in the mid 2010s of like who would outperform better. Your ability to just go find someone, give them a little bit of money and stay out of the way, or your ability to pick someone who wanted to do it and support them. Who would outperform? And in one version of that analysis, discovery outperformed developed. And in some sense, it was kind of obvious because of power law theories that, like, if you found the robot who was willing to do nothing but focus on this problem and also came from an elite university, so had outsized network effects and could pull in tons of favors. Yup, that was the way our economy works. A better way to outperform than to try to like take someone you really cared about and nurture them. That could be a whole other thing about whether that's good or bad or what that says about our economy. But that was one version of the research was picking the person who's gonna, and that's why pattern recognition came in, and why we got into a lot of weird things in venture, because pattern recognition and network effects stuff actually proved that it outperformed for structural reasons. I think you're saying an interesting thing here of does AI shift any of that? I'm a believer that we're probably not going to overwhelm all network effects. And we technically actually have some reporting coming out in a couple of weeks about some interesting some data on how still the agglomeration effects of existing tech hubs still tend to like supercharge the performance of some folks. But I think what you're saying is interesting, which is, does failure mode change now? And it's going to end up becoming more at the developed stage. And so to set it up with one, maybe one last question, I'll get to dig in with you before I lose you. If to speak out what I think I hear you saying in what feels real about a class of tools we call artificial intelligence. Let me interpret what I hear and tell me if I get it right. But what changes then is the putting your hand up and saying I'm interested enough in a problem to poke around on Claude Code or whatever while watching Real Housewives. Like you can get to a little prototype pretty easily, and so that is no longer like really the challenge whatsoever. That's your signal of you have some interest. You have some interest in the problem because you're poking around it outside of work, or you're doing it on the weekends, or you're just like whatever signal. Now it's like, okay, what do I do next? How do I get in? And those are not things you're born into knowing. Smart people will keep trying, but if someone can unlock and get you to that next step faster, that's helpful. That sounds a little bit more like developed. That sounds a little bit more of a case of stronger, more robust, more informed programs for entrepreneurs, because all of us would say entrepreneurship has surged around the country. Everyone has new business formations, but a lot of them are destined to be non-employers or single employers. Can more regional strategies take the Andrew, who started a little prototype thing, and say, hey, we want to develop you and make you go from a little side project into a bigger growing concern? And so why AI might make developed matter more in this next stage. Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying? Or am I losing my mind? Talk to me a little bit more about that, your take here about how it's changed.
Oh, I think it's fair. I mean, I think in the plainest of English, it's just from the outside, a company can look like it's moving in the right direction. AI has done more than just helped us build. AI has commoditized competence.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Everybody sounds good now. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens is AI is now moving a lot of founders faster, farther in the wrong direction. The deck is sharper, the demo is cleaner, the website's live, there are pilots in discussion, strategic partners interested. There's even a CRM that has data in it. And that it's not fake exactly, but it's not the same thing as market progress. And so I think, they can founders are learning to pitch without learning to sell. I think a founder can be busy in all the ways an ecosystem recognized. Remember back to the earlier point of it's easier to count how many founders have participated than whether their market focus has changed or whether their
Mm.
revenue is getting more efficient over time. And so a founder can be busy in all the ways that an ecosystem recognizes and still not be any closer to revenue. Commercialization is harder to turn into an event, right? Nobody wants to host a demo day where the lesson is like three of our companies discovered their original customer was wrong. One killed a pilot that had no path to budget, and two realized that their user is not their buyer. But honestly, that might be a very good demo day. Like that, and by the
Mm.
way, that is the more important thing now, right? I think we've made founders too fluent in the wrong language. And I will say that, be very careful citing statistics that include anything relevant to the performance of venture funds. That is a more complicated thing than understanding the laws of thermodynamics. The private markets and the way venture behaves, and some of the smartest people at the best institutions have tried to do this. It's nearly impossible unless you had perfect inside information and the general partners of the fund were actually releasing their performance data to you, which they do not ever do, period.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we do have to be a little bit skeptical when we cite venture as the argument to anything, most especially whether it's, founders are discovered or developed.
I'm gonna lose you in a sec, but what you said resonated. How do we translate this to advice to people, either economic developers who are, this is one of the many parts of the strategy, or the entrepreneur support org, or the local ecosystem organizer who's like, all right, well, what do I do now? I thought I did have a playbook because I read the book from 2018, and that's what I've been working on. And you're telling me it's all different. How should I be thinking about growing my ecosystem, or how do I push this forward? Translate it to the now.
I think if there's one thing that I'd want economic developers, foundations, and ecosystem leaders to take away, it's this. The goal is not simply to create more startups or fill up more co-working spaces or host more pitch events, right? The goal is to help more founders become more commercially viable. And that means only one thing: customers, revenue, repeatability, jobs, and therefore companies that can stay rooted in their communities. Because in the age of AI, building is going to keep getting easier. And I think the regions that win will be the ones that help them get better at selling.
Any better than that? Andrew Goldner is the founder and CEO of GrowthX. We were talking about entrepreneurs. Are they discovered or developed? I think we got somewhere. I've evolved my opinion. That counts for something. Andrew, thanks so much for your time.
Again, grateful. Thank you.
See you next time, everybody. Bye.